Calling us to order at 12:03. This is the BDAB Advocacy Subcommittee for Monday, March 27th, 2023. Do we need to do a roll call or do you have attendance recorded?
I have it. Thank you.
Perfect. Let's move on to the notes from the September 28th Advocacy Committee meeting, which it's hard to believe that was the last time we formally met. The minutes have been distributed since it was nearly 6 months ago. I'm going to guess we're going to have to just say that these are good to go. And I wouldn't remember any changes, but unless there are any changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the
Move approval.
notes as submitted.
Yeah, as submitted.
There's a motion by Wes. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded. And all those in favor?
All right.
Okay.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Ben, you want to tee up Colin?
Yeah, and this is really the, well, second here, make sure I get that. Okay. Seems like an issue. Yeah, so this is our second of three kind of discussions with BDAB and businesses around fee changes. Colin's gonna take us all through what we discussed, I think really, well, what we discussed for the first time with the members of the development community last week around proposed increases. I'm trying to type and then talk and figure this out at the same time. Yeah, and I'd say this group fairly informal, right? I think we're gonna have more opportunities in the next few months to have advocacy meetings around different policy issues and fee changes and the like. But this is the first one, and really would love your feedback and questions for the folks on the screen or remote. This is nuts. There we go. For the folks on the screen, would Colin's going to get up and move around just because these slides are kind of ones you need to point at certain things. I'll try to kind of trace the areas he's pointing at with my mouse once we get the slide shared, but probably won't be able to see all of your hands go up. So also feel free to kind of jump in and ask questions as we go through it. And with advocacy, a reminder, because we haven't met in about 6 months, you don't necessarily need to come up with a fully formed recommendation, but this is a first bite at the apple before we have a BDAB meeting next week on the topic, where I think there is an expectation or hope that BDAB will provide some feedback to council or staff or both. So want to kind of get things out in the open here and yeah, see what you all think. So you want to take it away? I'll think I've got it so I can actually share the slides now. All right. Took me that entire intro just to really buy time to get the share. Look at my dog at the same time, but that's not good because we can't. It's a huge dog. Yeah, she's a big dog too. So everyone on the screen can see everyone remote. Can you see the slides or can you see my
Yes.
dog? Okay.
So if you go into the PowerPoint, start the presentation and then share the presentation screen.
Yeah, I think when I flipped it right here, here's what I'll do. This is a new one compared to Teams or even council presentations. So
there you go.
Oh, perfect. All right. How about the folks on the screen? Can you see the actual full slides?
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Colin Stevens. I think I've met just everybody's here. I'm Community Economic Development Director. This is the second time I've given this presentation to outside folks. Obviously, we've done it with our internal staff. Well, this is the first of a series of presentations that I'll be giving over the course of the next couple of months. As Ben said, I will be standing up. I kind of like to stand when I talk, and I will point at the screen. So my apologies to those of you who are not physically here, and you won't be able to see what I'm pointing at. But we had really good feedback from the meeting last week. I have not made any changes to this presentation since then. I likely will, given the feedback that I got, and I'll talk a little bit about that feedback. It's mostly in how conservative we are with our projections moving forward, especially kind of in the out years, but we are a government agency. We're pretty conservative with financial matters. I think some businesses are kind of like speedboats. They can change things around if they need to. The city, we're kind of like a big freighter that takes a while to move. Also, we had Lisa Briggs, who's the business manager. She lives and breathes my budget and fees and that type of stuff. She was here last week when we had the meeting, and she could really answer very detailed questions. She's out for spring break this week, so if there are those types of questions, save them for next week or save them to me in writing and I can get back to you. All right, can you go to the first slide without further ado? So this is kind of our agenda. I'm going to talk about permit fees, obviously, but also who we are, what fees are, and why we have the fees and why they need to go up. So first slide. Who is CEDD with the Community and Economic Development Department? 121 full-time staff, full-time equivalent. We always have vacancies hiring. We have a few openings. We have 9 different divisions that provide services to the city. 18.7 million is our yearly budget. That's going to be for next biennium, so 2024 biennium. A couple facts about permits and applications. Calendar year 2021, we did 5,600 applications. And then this year, for the calendar year, which just finished a couple months ago, we were at 5,700 applications. And those were a wide variety of, just to give you a sense of scale. And how we are funded. So most of the fees, or most of the funding that we receive comes from permit fees. 86% of the budget of that 18.7 million needs to come from fees. We do have other revenue sources, a little bit of general fund money that mostly goes to growth management for doing things like CFAC, and what's been 7 years ago, they did UGB expansion. We get some general fund money for that. We get some utility money that mostly goes to our engineering staff because they work a lot with our water and sewer teams, providing those kind of services. We get a little bit of SDCs. I'll talk about SDCs in the future. We don't get much from those. Under state law, there's an administrative element to that we can direct towards paying the staff that collect the SDCs, but that's it. We mostly pass SDCs through. Transportation Construction Fund, more growth management and engineering money. TIF money goes to help fund some business advocacy, and that's mostly for our urban renewal areas. And we have a little bit of state grants and other funding that go to the Metropolitan Planning Organization, MPO. And so the permit fees, what are they? They are a way to employ people. We have engineers and inspectors, planners, building plans examiners, building techs, building inspectors, and administrative staff. And I'll go into more detail about how these are spread out a little bit. But they are also dedicated funds to community and economic development. They don't go to other staff or other services for the city. And what they are not, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, they're not systems development charges, SDCs. Those go to increase citywide infrastructure capacity. We collect them in community and economic development, and people often will pay for their permit fees at the same time that they pay for their SDCs. So in folks' minds, sometimes they get lumped together, but they're not SDCs. They're also not discretionary funds to be directed to other city services. And we'll hear that sometimes, like, oh, you're just collecting these fees because you need to go fill some potholes. Well, they don't do that. They just stay in the department to pay for the staff that provide services. And lastly, and very important, you'll see, and we'll talk about this in the future, you'll see why, they're not backed by the general fund. So when I run out of money, there's no insurance policy to come write me a check to help me out. The next slide. Why do the fees need to be increased? Well, personnel costs have gone up, not only for my department, but also for the overhead departments that we help fund. 3 out of the last 5 years, we've had no fee increases. And we had healthy reserves. You'll see this. We've had healthy reserves that we were eating into during that period because we've not been covering cost. And now our reserves have depleted to the point where we cannot continue to do that. And this is not a want, but it is a need. over the next 2 years, there's one new position we're going to add to the department. And so these fee increases I'm going to talk about are necessary to keep the existing staffing levels where they are so that we can not lose ground on the turnaround times that we've been working so hard to improve.
Were those reserves, were they accumulated in the department over a number of years, or was there like an injection of ARPA funds or anything that came in?
The first.
It's just all,
Yeah.
just kind of accumulated over the years.
We kind of got rebuilt in like the first 5-6 years coming out of the recession.
Yeah. And a lot of that honestly was done because we've had insufficient staffing levels and a lot of activity. So we kind of saved money by, working the staff really hard.
And why hasn't there been why isn't there an increase like every 2 years or as you're?
Oh, good question. I'll get to that.
Why dig into the reserves in the first place?
That's a good question. There were decisions that were made at the time that our reserves were healthy enough that we did not go out and ask the development community to increase fees.
Yeah, it's really hard when you're sitting on a big reserve saying, okay, let's increase fees again.
Yeah.
So there was just business decisions about not increasing fees.
Is there the magnitude of that reserve consumption? Can you give us some idea of did it go to half or 10% down, or can you talk to about that?
I have slides that show all of that. So you'll see it's just a gradual consumption of those reserves to the point where they're going to get all consumed if we don't do something. All right, next slide. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about this slide because you'll see this bar throughout the next series of slides. So I just want to make sure everybody understands what's going on here. So this colorful bar represents how the fees are distributed by fund. So this is the building division fees. I'm going to talk about building, and I'm going to talk about the planning fund and the planning division, and then we'll talk about the engineering fund and the engineering division. So out of the building fund, 62% of that goes to cover the building staff. 4% goes to materials and services. This is actually building is the biggest fund that we have. And so the M&S is actually pretty high. It's $463,000. Probably about half of that, a little less than half of that is for our third-party reviewer. So that's just going into a contract. The rest of it is things like training, paper. I mean, just sort of this would be car maintenance, but we're not adding any new cars for the next 2 years, which is our biennial budget. Then we have department overhead. So that yellow part is department overhead. So that's all staff that aren't assigned to another fund who help run the department. So I'm in that yellow part right there. Whereas like somebody who's doing a plan review or doing an inspection is down here in the blue. And then the top part, that darker blue, is the citywide overhead. And that's what we are essentially charged or what we pay up for things like the rent for this building or IT and Russ. So I'm in yellow, Russ is in the blue. So that's an overhead cost for legal department would be in that chunk of money. And that's about 20% of our overhead or 20% of the fund. Any questions on that one?
So does that overhead charge, the city charges going to the inter-fund service fund that the city has? Or is it specifically charged by department?
It's it's allocated out by department too. So every operating department has a city overhead allocation.
And that's a fixed charge that essentially runs with that fund for the entire fiscal year. So every month, you just divide it by 12 and every month we pay it out.
The budget committee looks at all that with the overall city budget documents.
Just curious, how is that determined? Is it by number of staff that you pay a percentage, proportional share of it, or?
In some regards, yes, like IT would be that way, or I think they would be more like what your equipment is, but things like legal, they do what's called a look back, where they keep records and then they look back. And so essentially you're paying for the work that was done the year before, but that's how they estimate going forward. All right, next slide. So here is the building fund, and this is some of those factors that I've been talking about. I'm going to stand up and point at the screen again. And I want everybody to have a full understanding of what's happening here. So this is projecting or goes back to fiscal year 2019. And it's looking forward for the full biennium, which is these 2 years right here. What I'm showing at the very bottom of those percentages, those are where we took fee increases. So for the building fund, there was a 3% increase in 2020 and a 3% increase in 2022. The next number up where it says 35, 37, 37, 36 with an asterisk, those are the number of staff that were actually employed those years. So we wanted to be sure to represent, how much was actually paid out to the staff within that fund. We generally carry about a 10 to 15% understaffed. It's just we're usually trying to hire somebody leaves, it takes a while, so we have an open or vacant position. So the ones with the asterisk, those were how we actually finished the year out. The ones moving forward, those are the actual approved FTE. So we're showing that there's 44 employees in this fund. Some of the feedback we got during this presentation last week was maybe that's a little bit too conservative, is to say you're going to have that many staff. But that's what we have to do for our budget. This is what we're adopting in our budget. And so this is how I'm presenting it out. I may try to work with Teresa to maybe have another little slide or just show what it would do if we did that 10% reduction, what that would actually show with the numbers. But it's not going to change the story a whole lot.
And we had a quarter to a third of our staff turnover during the pandemic, just like everybody else.
This dark horizontal line, that's revenue. So you like this, where your revenue is above your expenditure and you have daylight right there. That's good. When the line is below the bar and there's no daylight, that's not so good, because that means you're spending more money than you're earning. And so these are our revenues. We had a bump in 2022 just from Zoomtown. There's a lot more activity than we had assumed. We're sort of normalizing for that. That was another comment that we got the last presentation, was maybe this could be, make some higher assumptions on revenues. Don't be so conservative in there. Again, we're a fairly conservative, fiscally conservative organization. That top line is, well, it starts out on the top. That represents the reserves. And so back in 2019, there were 24 months of reserves. That's a very healthy reserve fund. We like to have between 12 and 18 months of reserves. That's kind of like the recommended industry standard for where your reserves are. Our fiscal policy is to not have anything less than 6 months reserves. So we don't like to go below, well, we have a policy to not go below 6 months, but we like to be between 12 and 18. So as you can see, and this is back to the question you raised earlier, kind of hard. I mean, we did it in 2020, but in 2021, we had pretty healthy reserves. We did not raise fees. We did again in 2022. We were down to 18 months. So we were pretty healthy now. Here we are this year, and we're really seeing the consumption. You can see how the costs have gone up, really eating into the reserves, and then they just tank. They're off the chart on the wrong direction. So where this represents, you can see we're going to finish up next year at 6 months reserves, and then at the end of the biennium, we're down to 1 month reserve. And then if you project out further, it's off the chart.
So just as a point of clarification, I mean, this chart's really good and it's a great comparison. If you start at 2019, we were around 6.5, maybe 6.8 million in total departmental costs in 2019. And by the time we get to 2025, we're at 12.9 or 11.9, almost doubling the budget in a 5-year window. That's pretty interesting. And there's no wonder revenues can't keep pace with that.
That's right. And that's adding 1 FTE.
That math doesn't work.
Well, it's a host of things. A lot of it has to do with personnel expenses. So we had new negotiated contracts that had pretty healthy year-on-year increases to wages across the board at the city. We've been asked to do more and more as a city, and just in terms of programs and processes, and even in Collins Group, they've been asked to do more and more We have more data that we have to deal with. We have more requirements coming from the state. All that just compounds into the cost of running the business downstairs.
Hey, Russ, this is Karna. So my understanding, and I would like an actual breakdown of staff that got added between, because my understanding is that some departments actually got added to the CDD budget, including the diversity, equity, and inclusion. The managers for those amounts, those staff are now in this budget. So I'd actually like to see a breakdown of the actual staff that got included over between 2021 and now.
Yeah, and Karna, most of that is coming through the citywide overhead, that dark blue bucket on the top. The only people.
So why are we paying for more overhead than we did in 2019?
Because the city's being asked to do more and more stuff across the board.
Well, yeah, but the community development department isn't. And why did DEI get added to community development?
They do not get added directly to community development. They're part of the citywide overhead structure that gets allocated into them. So the only people that are in CDD, I think we've got there's some people that are helping with the software and things like that in terms of direct allocations, but nothing. All the other internal services upstairs is cost allocated out from the entire city.
So Russ, is it safe to say like that dark blue overhead is like all the city's costs and you guys are taking a percentage of that? It's distributed across each department in some manner, but the light blue, we're gonna call it light blue today, is your actual staff that's related to the specific department.
Yeah, I would say
And the yellow.
Or yellow. Okay, sorry.
Yellow and blue.
Yeah.
And not only that, did the software actually cause a lot of this? Because if so, we can get rid of the software and go back to Acela.
No, Karna, no, it's the amount of, just with everything going on in terms of doing housing analysis and all the requirements at the state level, we need the software to pull all this data out. Yes, we had issues with the software, and Colin's been going over how that's getting course corrected. The software is not really driving this anymore. It is just the overall cost of, trying to run the community economic development and the city.
Yeah, and the software went into effect in 2020.
So I noticed
but what I'm saying is you've added a whole bunch of new staff for the software, which you didn't need to do if we didn't have the software. Not only that, but housing needs analysis have been required for years for the urban growth boundaries. So I don't think that's what's causing extra amount. So I guess what I'm saying is I would love to see an actual breakdown of the actual staff that got added and find out where these reserves were spent, because it's mind-boggling the amount of reserves that you guys burn through in such a short period of time.
We can give you all that information.
Even when you had reduced staff, that you kept telling us you had 5, 6, 9, 10 staff positions open during the entire pandemic, of which there should have been savings of money.
Yep, and that's it's exactly what you're seeing here, Karna. So if you look at 22 to 23, all that's personnel savings. Now the team's fully staffed at 44, and that's why you're seeing the rise in that light blue bar. So when you look back 22 and earlier, that's actual cost. And of course, then we have to forecast forward on kind of what our actual staffing is in the full department and in every position. We got to make sure it's covered in the budget.
So gentlemen, if I'm doing the math, you've got a 15-16% compound annual growth rate in your costs projected between 19 to 25 roughly. Is that similar to other departments in the city?
Sorry,
Gone from 6.5 million to 11.9 million in 6 years, right? I think it's going to work out to be,
I think you're right. And then we had some pretty significant, just like all the other, a lot of other people in terms of wage increases, it was in the 10% year, range. So just those were negotiated contracts with our unions and things like that drive our cost. I'd say a lot of that is just personnel cost increase in wages and insurance and benefits and all that kind of stuff that the city has to do.
do you have a feel for how much of it is PERS?
Not exactly the PERS number, but I do know, if you just take, 10% on wages, right? That's kind of like the floor of the discussions of what cost of it.
Right, and have you projected that 10% number into 24 and 25?
Yeah, so all that has been loaded, because in parallel with this, we're working on the entire city budget.
Yeah.
In the background, it's actually getting ready to go to print and then go to the budget committee in May.
So I noticed that the department overhead for 24 and 25 is a lot larger than like for 23. What's the basis on that? Like what's happening there?
Again, what we're doing is this represents actual years. So there is some savings in here where we had open positions.
Yeah.
But again, for our budgeting purposes, we fully load those with all the approved FTEs.
And there have been a couple additional FTEs that have been put in there. The front counter is now open from 8 to 5. So that was an additional staff member that went in there.
Yeah, the new staff member that we're adding into the program is going to be doing short-term rental enforcement and home energy score. And that one's going into the department overhead position.
So if we
Is that-
overlay
Supposed
the
to
actual
cost
staff,
anybody anything, a home energy score, right?
Yeah, right.
so if we overlay the actual staffing in the early years 19 and 20, how would that compare to those actuals? Because were we saved by the difficulty in staffing? Otherwise, our reserves could have been substantially lower and we'd be at 0 before 25.
Correct. A lot of the building of the reserves was done because we had open positions and more activity. We went into COVID thinking we were going to lose staff. We were going to be laying people off. We didn't understand that what Zoomtown was. And it went, we got a lot more activity than we thought we were going to, and we didn't have, we weren't really fully staffed up for it. So it was pretty hectic around here, but it made the budget balance pretty well.
So it masked a budget problem by at least a couple of years.
Well, I mean, and also understand we were trying to figure out what was going on with the revenue at the same time. And then we had big personnel savings because of turnover. So that's why we didn't make any big moves up through FY22, because we weren't sure what the heck was going on with the economy, where our staffing levels really needed to be. And we still had hefty reserves, especially in the building fund. And that's why we didn't make any big move, because we would have come out, we had 18 months reserves in 22 and said, hey, we want to do a 10 to 15% fee increase. We would have been escorted out of the building at that point. So
I still don't understand how builders through fees have to pay for the DEI staff, the energy score staff. Why isn't if that's a decision of the counselors to add those types of departments, why isn't the general fund paying for that? Why are the builders through their fees having to pay for that?
well, we will be increasing some fees on the short-term rental and things to cut. And Karna, you know the situation of our general fund. So
I get it, but still, I don't understand how they can add those type of people and then ask builders to pay for it, especially when we were against it.
point noted, Karna.
So with this,
sorry,
with these, I was going to say one more thing about the graphs are very illuminating, and and this is a good way to present it. But basically, if with no revenue changes and just doing the same activity, we're doing less with more people. And that seems weird. You go back to 2019 and we're basically saying we're going to be about that same level in permit revenue if we don't make any fee changes going out into 2025. And we have way more costs, and we're doing the same level of activity we were doing back in 2019. So, again, something doesn't quite work in the way the math is flowing through there. Because that revenue line is reflective of the permits forecasted forward at the same level that they are right now, basically.
Yep, you're right. I mean, we discounted 2022 as being a very high activity level. So we normalized for that one. But yeah, we're basically projecting about the same volume of activity as we had back in 2019. We're projecting that forward.
So with that said then, Colin, because one of the things that's been the beef has been the long turnaround times and all the other, things that we've heard about, in other sessions and meetings. So will we get to where there's reasonable turnaround times and it's not the, extended, permitting period processing and all that sort of stuff? Or is it just going to be more expensive but the same?
Well, the turnaround times is a whole nother presentation that I have, but you're right, you can't separate the two topics from each other.
No, because
we are taking it very seriously. We are aware of the situation on the turnaround times. We've developed some strategies and initiatives that we're implementing right now that we believe are helpful that will be helpful in reducing the turnaround times. So it's something that we're going to have to continue to make better. We are actively working on that, but we need to be able to maintain the existing staff that we have. They are trained professionals. They are hard to replace in many regards because they've got certifications. They know our system. They know our city. So that's really what this effort is to do, is to keep those folks employed and working on those permits and doing those inspections.
But Wes, I will say the ship is turning in the positive direction in terms of all the work that Colin's been doing. Review times are starting to come down. Everyone also needs to understand the complexity of which applications coming in is going up as well. So it's actually taking longer to get permits out the door because we have to review things on different, the complication of where the projects are and what the projects are requires sometimes more review time on each project.
Yeah.
Isn't it also true that
In the sake of
Isn't it
kind of
also
keeping
true that
us on
city-
track.
Yeah, I've got quite a few more slides to go through.
Yeah.
On turnaround times, I will be giving a presentation to the city council at their quarterly update on April 19th. So,
I have a
Great.
quick question, I think. On the very bottom of the graph, each bar, there's the 2020 and 2022 that has a 3% versus the rest have 0%. You may have
Right.
said this, but what does that mean? What was the
those were
numbers?
the increases that we did.
Fee increases? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just a general, like at the beginning of fiscal year.
So I think for the sake of keeping us on track, let's maybe if you have additional questions kind of on this or comments, you can filter them through Ben, who can kind of consolidate them, get them over to Colin.
This is a good tee up for.
Yeah.
there's a
You're
bunch
gonna
of
see a
slides
pattern
like
here.
this.
Yeah.
You'll see this in there. So we did a fee study. We're doing a fee study. There's one underway right now. We do them about every 4 or 5 years. We needed to wait and see what the budget numbers we were going to get for knowing what our costs were going to be. Those are all plugged in. And so the next slide is going to show what a fee increase would do if you just kind of followed the book, and said, hey, next year we need to be back in the black, get out of the red, into the black, cover the cost of service next fiscal year. For building, that would be a 60% increase in the fees for next fiscal year, followed by a 10% for the next 3 fiscal years. That's huge. We understand that. We know that that's too much. So we have a proposal. What we're going to do is to phase it in. We are going to cut into our reserves as much as we can. In fact, we're going to have to go in and change that fiscal policy that says you're supposed to always have at least 6 months of reserves. We're going to change that until we can dig our way out of this by phasing the fees in. So we are right here. We're 3 months away, like April, May, June. We're 3 months away from finishing out this year, which will be at 13 months. Next year, we're going to do a 20% increase, followed by another 20. And then in the out years, 26 and 27, this is where the budget is that we're adopting ends here. We're going to project it out and say, we're going to take 4 years, 2 budget cycles to get our fees back up to where they should be. So we're covering the full cost of the service. You can see what it does to reserves, but we're just going to do this and monitor it. And what we're going to do is we're adopting fees for this year. We'll be continually monitoring it and making sure that this trend continues. But this is really the first year that it's going to be effective.
And this will be a conversation we'll be having both here and probably with the builders of a quarter by quarter review of revenue and fees, just to be very transparent on where we're at. Because we also don't know what in terms of like application load, we're holding pretty flat. And we don't know yet how things are going to turn as we continue to kind of climb out of the post-pandemic years.
what does a fee look like on like a single family house?
I've got all.
Okay.
Yeah, let him go through this.
I'm just trying to I need to put dollars to such big
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
20% doesn't mean anything. to
Yeah,
me.
I know.
It's great perspective because we have the same comment.
Okay, so that's the building fund. We have two other funds I want to go through, planning and engineering. Any quick questions on that before we jump? All right, we'll do planning next. So out of the three funds, building is kind of in the middle, planning is the worst, and engineering is the best in terms of just the condition of their reserves.
And what I think about is planning is the one that's been holding the review times because most of them are statutory. So this group has been performing
Yeah.
at expectation levels for review times.
So here is the breakdown for the planning fees. Again, the lighter blue is the actual staff that do the review on the planning permits. Then their M&S is that purple. Most of the planning M&S is goes to our contract that we have with the mailing service, because that's where planning is where due process takes place within the development process. And so we have legal notice that has to go out. Department overhead, same story as building. That's kind of like me, and others who are in the admin portion of the department, and then the citywide overhead is about 24% of the planning funds budget. So next slide, similar story here, going back to 2019, fairly healthy reserves in that 18-month level, and revenues were above expenditures. And then 2020, same story as what happened in building. We were started to eat into the reserves in here, continuing to eat into it. Similar activity in 2022, where we had more activity than we anticipated. And so that would save that year pretty well. But then here we are in this year right now. And you can see, which we're again off the chart over here. So this represents right here on 2024. This would be next summer if we don't do anything.
Each department has its own reserve.
Yeah. Dedicated funds for those departments.
Yeah.
Or divisions.
Because they have to be service funded, right? There's no general fund backstop. That's why you would maintain a reserve.
Yep. And we're basically, they're just so everyone's aware, council made the decision that there's basically no general fund support or outside support coming in.
So that's a unique story for planning. I'd like to just remind everybody about that. It was back in, I think it was about 10 years ago. We had a fairly extensive conversation with the development community, and based on that, and based on the health of the general fund at the time, the council gave through the budgeting process the planning division about $500,000 a year to help pay for code amendments, part of the front counter, and pre-application meetings. So that was in place until 2018, and so really about back here the year we quit tracking it. So that funding was removed, but there was no commensurate increase in the fees at that time because we had very healthy reserves. And in fact, I have the ordinance that did that. It said that we consciously decided to do that, not to raise the fees, remove the general fund, and just eat into the reserves. And now we're dealing with the results of that. But a similar story for planning. Again, same kind of numbers where we have the actual staff. We're actually projecting out, we'll end this year at 18 planners. We're actually holding a position for this coming year open right now until we see results of this. We'll probably keep that open for the foreseeable future until we can figure out how this fund is looking, in the next 6 months or a year. So what does that mean for fee increases for planning? I'll go to the next slide. So this is what it would look like, the theoretical, if we've got back to cost of service in year one, and that would be a 60% increase for the first year, followed by 3 years of 10% increases. And you can see we're just kind of skimming the treetops on that 6 month reserve. But again, we know that we don't want to put that kind of increase that quickly on the development community. So what we're proposing, next slide, is to do a similar thing, phase it in, but we do a 30% increase this coming fiscal year and followed by another 30 and then 2 10s. And again, we're going to be dropping all the way down below our 6 month reserve. But by the end, close to the end of next fiscal year, we'll be in the black and then in the black and then even some daylight out in four fiscal years from now.
Why are you jumping this one up to the 30 instead of doing 2020 like you did on the last one?
The free fall's got a greater trajectory in it on reserves.
The longer you wait, the worse it gets.
Gotcha.
What's the strategic thought process between supply and demand increasing fees? I mean, I guess we need to know what the dollar amount is. 30% is hard to understand
show
if
you
somebody
that.
would pay that, but
Yeah.
assuming that there would be an adverse effect to such a large increase, what is the city's plan on reacting to that? There, we already have discussions about people doing business in other jurisdictions because of the cost and the complexity of the review process. So how would you react to that if you increase these fees and a lot of business goes elsewhere? Are you then just going to lay off all these people that you work so hard to get, or is there a different plan?
We can have that. Let me go through the rest of these slides because I have a slide that shows like the consumer price index compared to what we've done compared to housing costs. That's kind of at the end. So next slide. And the private development engineering, the third fund I'm going to talk about. This one actually is the youngest fund that we have. It's kind of the youngest division that we have within the permit review side of the house. But again, same story here. We've got most of the funding goes to engineering staff. And then a little bit of M&S, and then department overhead and citywide overhead. Next slide. And you can see that the reserve fund for this one is actually in pretty good shape. Even at the end of this fiscal year, we'll be at 13% or 13 months. But then it starts to drop down so that we're down at 9, and then we finish the fiscal or the biennium with a 6-month reserve. What we're proposing for this one is this would be the cost of the service for year 1. Which would be a 30% increase followed by a 6, and then 2/8 would project that out into the next biennium. But what we're proposing for this one is to do a 10 this coming year, followed by another 10, and then continue to monitor, but likely do 10s in the next biennium as well. Any questions on this one? All right, next slide.
Fairly similar.
So other changes. So for those who work with us quite a bit, will remember that there is a long-range planning surcharge. It's on all planning and engineering fees, and that helps support the long-range planning services. That is currently set at 4%, and that's going to be going to 10%. Also, we do licensing fees. And we don't really need to spend a lot of time on these because there are various types of licenses that we issue, and none of them are collecting close to their full cost recovery. So we're going to move those into the direction of trying to bring them into full cost recovery, but it'll probably take a few years to get there. I just wanted everybody to be aware that that's part of this as well.
What, can you give us an example?
Short-term rentals, sound variances, marijuana, taxis, Uber, Lyft, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a discussion in April around the business registration fee as well.
Okay. So here's a slide that shows both the building planning and engineering increases that we've done since 2018. There was 3% in 2020. Another 3% for engineering and building that was done in 2022. That year, planning took a 5.5%. And so since 2018, planning's up at 8.5%. Building and engineering went up 6%. And then if the Western region consumer price index is up close to 20% during that same time period. And then the next slide shows those two numbers, those same numbers are the ones down here, the lower ones. So that's building and engineering at 6. This is planning at 8.5. This is consumer price index. That's the housing price index. So you can really see how that one particular factor is just taken off exponentially in this area. Not 100% sure what I'm trying to explain with that slide, but I thought it was really interesting information.
Well, it's kind of important when you start looking at what the overall impact is, like when you,
Yeah.
because when we talked about, Tom's gonna get to in a second, is everyone's really interested, like, what's the total check that I'm writing to the city, which is mostly SDCs.
Right.
You write checks to the city, so.
I think what it states is that everything's getting more expensive, and so it's
Yeah.
following suit.
Your
It's
shelter
across
is
the
a
board.
third of your CPI, so that's.
I mean, it's just the trend lines of inflation and everything going. What it's demonstrating is we've been cautious with our fees. Inflation has taken off past what we've been doing. Because basically we're trying to run like a business where we have no control of our inputs or of what's coming in, right? So that's why we have the reserves.
Yes, but a 20% CPI in 5 years doesn't account for 70% increase in fees.
So it's just a data point, right?
Yeah.
And so the next slides are kind of the numbers that people want to see.
Yeah.
How this is going to affect. So here's your single family house. It has current fees. So the permit fees currently are a little over 6,000. SDCs are at 28. And then other fees, which would be the affordable housing fee and a water meter, close to $2,000 for total fees and charges. So it's fees and SDCs, which are charges, are 36,000. With the proposed increase, and this is for this next fiscal year, and this we did grow SDCs at 3%. We're making some assumptions there, including the parks SDCs. And this pie shows how that gets divvied up. So city SDCs, park SDCs. These are our permit fees right here, and then the affordable housing and the water meter. This is an actual 2,200 square foot house with a 400 square foot garage. Permits are 19% of the total fees and charges.
Hey, Colin.
Yep.
This doesn't reflect the SDC study and the massive amount of increases that the system development charges are going to go up. And that 3% I think is wrong. Even with inflation, I think that even if you use just the inflation July 1, that's going to go up by 7+%.
Yeah, and we know that we're just using the current data points because I don't know what the SDC methodology is going to show yet.
Yeah, and I don't know what Parks is going to do, but we plugged in 3%. But what I wanted to show was
that's really low. That's really low.
I don't disagree with you, Karna.
So,
But that probably, even then, if you kept the permit fees at what you're planning, you would just not run into such a deficit in your reserves by planning this way, correct? If that number goes up, then you would, or no?
So SDCs and permit fees in terms of revenue and what they're doing completely separate. So whatever Colin's talking about around permit fees, that's its own universe with the reserves.
Got it.
So as you can see, the difference for a house, a 2,200 square foot house, is about $1,300 increase in the permit fees.
Was that 21% across like a commercial project?
I have those two.
Got that.
And they're all different because they kind of charge different rates. Yeah. So this is multi-unit residential, and in this case, it was 8 units on 8plex. A little bit of a different mix. Currently, the permit fees are about 14,000. They would go up to a little over 17. So the difference there would be $3,200 for an 8plex, which goes up to it's really just a $400 difference for what CEDD fees are. This would be the increase with the SDCs would be close to $1,000. But you can, kind of speaks for itself. Any questions on this one? Next slide. So, whoops. So this would be a commercial building. So 19,000 square foot commercial building. Again, this is an actual project. So currently the fees are $145,000. They would go up about $27,000 just in the CEDD fees. But as you can see, the bulk of the charges here are SDCs for a project like this. Any questions on this slide?
Just based on that square footage and those total fees, including SDCs, that's $36 a foot just in fees to put up a commercial building.
Gonna be
Wow.
Yep.
10% of the total cost.
That
I think
will
some
kill,
of
that's
this-
gonna kill projects. I guarantee that's gonna kill projects.
Mhm.
So
This was a vet clinic, is that
I think
right?
it's,
So not a high cube warehouse. Not that I'm trying to, give a value judgment either way, but it's a pretty broad spectrum of commercial projects that come through
Mhm.
in terms of their impact just on SDCs, right?
So this was medical,
I think it was a veterinary clinic. But so, is
19,000 square foot veterinary clinic?
that right, Colin? It was something like that. It was a pretty high traffic.
That's pretty huge for a veterinary
It
clinic.
was based on one that came through, so. They tried to use recent projects.
What, we know what the total valuation project was,
I don't know.
construction valuation.
So what this is trying to represent, and I
3
don't disagree with you. There's a lot of money, but most of that is for the SDCs. The delta, the increment on these permit fees, the difference is 27,000. So it's roughly $30,000 difference on the changes that I'm talking about today.
We about
And
half a
then-
percent on the cost of that building, roughly, the changes.
Cumulative or
No, I
just
mean,
the,
it's probably at least a 3.5. I mean, even if you did it cheap, $3.5 million project, right? So
Well, that's a pre-engineered metal building, which is
yeah,
cheap compared to more custom.
So, I mean, what this tells me is that even when we're talking about double-digit increases in the permit fees, even a very small increase in SDCs has a much bigger impact.
on the cumulative effect.
Yeah.
I mean, have you guys done any analysis on how elastic your demand is?
All right, next slide is an ADU. So the difference would be about $800, almost $900 would be the changes to an ADU just in the permit fees. And then close to $200 with SDCs at 3%. And then the affordable housing fee we're projecting to go up to $108 will be the difference.
That cost per square foot is gonna be even higher because an ADU is probably not gonna be very big.
Yep, they're limited to 800 square feet.
We totally understand the impact this has. I mean, that's why we're being so transparent around this.
And that's why I put an ADU up here, because I think that, a lot of people won't pull a permit. If they do, this may be one that they would. All right, and so next steps, today is the Advocacy Subcommittee. I'll be back next week at the regular BDAB meeting next Monday. I'm going to present to my entire department on April 4th, and then to COBA on April the 11th. Affordable Housing Advocacy Committee is April the 12th, quarterly update to City Council on the 19th. So I'm going to talk about these fees. I'll probably shorten it up a little bit for council on the 19th because I'm also going to be talking about turnaround times. So tune into that one if you have interest. Then we go into the budget deliberations, and they culminate on May 22nd and 23rd. And then the council adoption of the budget, which includes the entire new fee schedule, will be on June the 21st. And the effective date is July 1. I mean, fiscal year.
Yeah, so what Colin showed, that is what is being put into the budget documents now that are being prepared for budget deliberations. So that's been embedded through finance, the city manager's office, and that's what's being embedded in the documents to be published, to be put out to the budget committee when they go into deliberations. Because we had to put a marker somewhere to get the budget documents moved, because that's a
Hey, Russ
That's a-
and Colin.
yeah,
Russ and Colin, when's the notice going out?
on the budget.
No, the fee.
We have a
increase.
couple,
When
we
is
have a
the
couple
notice
different
going out?
notices that need to go out, Karna. And I don't remember exactly when they're going out. But we do need to notice the building fee increase, and we also need to send notice out for the planning fee increase. We've got all that built into the plan.
So could I,
Coba's gonna get one of those, right?
I assume so.
Yep, I assume so.
so this is a really hard conversation and I feel for you guys. I look at this stuff though, I got to tell you, and I think about the housing numbers we're supposed to hit with the governor's new order, and I'm really worried. I'm really worried. Here's what I do know is that a lot of folks would have gladly paid that extra money to expedite their permits over the last couple of years. If they could have their permits in a timely fashion, they probably would have saved that money to begin with. In other words, the difference between the delay. So this is just really hard to digest. And I just want to say that my feeling is, from what I've heard from developers, builders, just folks out in the community, that if you raise fees, whether they're permit fees and or the FCCs, the total overall cost without some sort of benefit, real benefit that equals, I'm going to save $1 million because now this is taking me a year to do instead of 2.5, because it's a big project, for example, because I know there are people out there paying a lot of money right now because of the delays. I see that as absolutely key in selling this, is you must, and I know you're working on it, show where this increase, this necessary increase, is going to result in a cost savings and expedition of permits and projects on the ground. That's just from initial digestion. I think that's the only way that this is going to be really palatable. Otherwise, I think this is going to be tough. You probably already know this, Choir.
Katie, I totally understand. I'm going to tell you, you're never going to get a dollar for dollar return on this, right? Just from the position that the city's in. However, we are turning those around. I would also say, great. What would you like us to do about the situation? Because our costs are going up. We're being asked to do more and more, right? We want to make sure that our staff is here to review permits. So we get no general fund allocation. There is no discretionary money that is available. All the other dollars that came into the cities and governments have dried up. We've been asked to do more and more with less and less. So again, I totally understand and respect that. I'm just trying to figure out, great, then what is the second solution here to solve this problem?
And I'm right there with you, Russ. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I get this. I do. I'm just telling you.
I think she's just saying, like, in order to sell it, to show it, it's got to have, like,
You're selling it
besides
to
the,
city
hey, I'm
council. They're not
trying to
gonna
catch up
not approve
to a reserve fund, but also, what are you bringing to the table? You know, is there any other benefit? Like, maybe there's, like, have a list of all the benefits of what you guys are doing,
So maybe
that this increase.
so what that's, I think what they're telling us though is this is for business as usual.
Well, I will tell you, the review times are turning.
Yeah.
Right, that is on a trajectory, and that doesn't turn overnight, but it is. Colin's done a great job with his team to
Yeah.
get that thing turned around. I'm telling you, we're putting more data out than any other city in the state in terms of our review times and how we look at stuff, because we've been asking questions around that. So
Right.
we have a lot of resources trying to figure that out and move it, and the dial is moving. But I totally agree with the frustration that everybody has, because we have the same frustration. I'm just setting the expectation of this is the reality of the situation that we're in. And we are trying to figure this out just as much as everybody else.
Yeah, I think what I might like to see, and I don't know what information is available, but what have you done or what do you plan to do to make the government operation more efficient, right? Because you can't, right, that cost curve can't continue at that rate. Or you're especially if it's similar, costs are running across levels of government. I think that would be something that I would want to hear. Like, here's what we've done. Here's what, we think we will eventually achieve some long-term efficiency gains from the new software, or like, you're still in the build mode for that. I think that's really important information. In addition to, I think we're getting permits out faster is gonna sweeten the bitterness of this pill really well.
So,
I'll say
Kevin, I have one
with
other
the
idea.
overhead, sorry, what I've noticed in each one of them is that the specific department overheads took a larger leap than the general staffing did.
Yep.
So it's understanding too, what's causing that department overhead to go up so much compared to the staffing. The staffing's going at a slower pace and the overhead just went,
Yeah, there's one that's particularly pronounced in one of them because we did a reallocation. Took some away from building and gave it to planning and engineering because building had more of a share and now given, and that was decided 3 or 4 budgets ago. And then it's based on our numbers moving forward with this budget, it was buildings at like 44, planning and engineering both at like 20. So we did a 50, 25, 25 split, whereas it was more like a 60 something, 20, 10. So that's why that one jumped up. I think it was mostly in the engineering one.
How do our
Colin?
historical costs and proposed costs compare to comps inside and outside the state?
I haven't looked at that number.
And John, that's a difficult thing to do because when you start comparing us to other jurisdictions, a lot of those other jurisdictions are getting general fund support, and that's why their fees are lower. So this gives us
still
actually policy decisions around how our budgets get set up from council.
Yeah, so the element of control is different likely, but it's still going to be a measurement stick for anybody building because they don't just have to choose Central Oregon, right? They can look anywhere.
I can tell you, I mean, I'm on calls with a lot of other assistant city managers from around the state. Everybody's having these same type of budgetary issues across all their local budgets. I mean, we're not an outlier here in terms of the pressures on city budgets.
We've got a lower permanent assessed tax rate, which is, you're seeing the results of that. That's why we get no general fund support, very limited general fund support. So yeah, there could be other jurisdictions that, you pay every year more in taxes, but they have lower fees. So but at the end of the day, it's a zero-sum game.
Wes, you said you had one additional suggestion.
I did, and this one should be pretty straightforward. So engineering has a 15% citywide overhead. And why on earth do the other 2 departments, planning and building, have a 20%? That adds a significant pile of additional cost into the costing pool for recovery at 20% as opposed to it being at 15%. So if I would make one suggestion, that is a totally discretionary number that the city is deciding to charge itself. Because you said there's no general fund support, and yet there's support going back the other direction to all the overhead of the city. So that equation has to be balanced better. Why isn't it 5%? That's just a magic number that's getting, charged by finance to the departmental function. And I think it needs to be explained.
And it is in the budget documents, Wes, in the overall city budget documents.
But it's in the budget. I'm talking about why on earth they charge that number to the permitting process as opposed to other stuff.
It gets charged, police and fire get allocations of it. Everyone gets allocations of this. Engineering, streets, utilities.
I know, but why is one, but the point is why is one 15% over in engineering when it's 20 in the other 2 functions?
Yeah, we can look at it. A lot of it has to do with cost basis because we actually look at fund by fund, like what was their cost of fleet, what was their cost of IT, what was their cost of legal. And those are kind of looked forward and look back. But there is an allocate, there's a massive spreadsheet that figures out how to do this.
Like for example, planning pays more to legal than building and engineering do because planning is where development gets appealed. It goes to MUBA or it can go to goes to the courts. So they allocate more to legal than the other funds do.
So then why does the building department get charged 20% overhead and planning get charged 20% overhead and engineering only gets charged 15%?
We can
So
look
there's
into it.
legal.
Wes. I can tell you, it's. I totally hear you. I mean, and it would be. When you actually dive into the numbers and look at them, there's not much sway you can make it that's going to turn the overall storyline of what's going on there.
Yeah.
I hear you. I understand what you're saying, Wes. Totally understand. But I've gone through the numbers with finance, and it is quite a web of allocations that occurs. But there's the cost still has to go somewhere.
I understand, but what it's doing is it's forcing city overhead that we have zero control over, and who knows if it's wasteful or not, onto a process that now you guys are trying to sell to a constituency. So, you know, not having it backed up is, you know, yeah. So
It is, Wes, it is backed up and it's in the budget documents. I mean, I can have finance talk to you if you want to know how those allocations work. But
I
again,
think that'd
it
be a
goes,
really good idea.
I will tell you, this goes, I mean, when you start looking at the budget document, it goes into the overall structural health
What I'll call it.
and well-being of, as you know, Wes, of the city as a whole and what our funding limitations are, right?
Hour and a half.
Okay.
So,
Yes and no. I mean, yeah, I know we're kind of pushing our time allocation here, so yeah, thank you for coming and sharing this with us. You've got really I don't envy you having to make this presentation to all these different constituencies over the next 90 days. I think let's see, about June 21st is when the torches and pitchforks will probably show up at City Hall.
well, I mean, in all reality, this is why we want to get this out of public process because budget deliberations are, you know, and getting public feedback. That's why we're doing this, right? That's why we're in the middle of this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Any additional comments from the committee will please send them to Ben and he'll consolidate them. And then this will be on the BDAB agenda for Monday.
For Monday, yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll send out the slides from today, the recording. And I was mentioning to Kevin, we'll maybe try to grab someone from finance if there are finance questions that are broader for BDAB on the 3rd. Yeah, just assuming, yeah, I'll blindside Jeanette with that shortly. It's a bigger conversation. It's a big conversation, I should.
So my understanding is, while you claim that this is a public process, really none of these numbers are going to change.
I've seen stuff change in the budget deliberation process, but I mean, that's why we're here putting these numbers out. We're trying to be as transparent as we can. They just got finalized in the preparation of budget. Now that's why Colin's doing this.
I'd also like to see the presentation change to have a realistic SDC increase in there. And I'd also like a slide adding to the fact that you're increasing these 20% per year and what that's going to do over the next 5 years so that a realistic number in 5 years can actually be shown.
As we refine the SDCs, we can, Karna. I understand what you're saying.
Thanks.
Great.
Well,
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. And your helpful input.
thank you all for taking the time today and apologize for running a little bit long, but this obviously is a topic that required a little bit of detail.
But hot topic.
We are